No, yeah, before like all this, I was a medical science student, and my parents had always wanted me to be a doctor, and I didn't know if I wanted to do that. And so I was a videographer, and I became a videographer for this like startup digital marketing agency. And they were like, "Do you want a job?" And I was like, "Maybe." I'm still a student. And then I also fell into startup a very similar way, where I was like, what is the lowest barrier of entry? And it was like creating videos and doing some of the marketing and social media stuff. And that turned into like marketing campaign management, and somehow got into some sort of startup accelerator, started my own company. And yeah, and it all just fell into place. And I decided to leave school a year, like graduate a year early and not go to med school, and instead became an entrepreneur. So I totally resonate with that story.
Wait, this is amazing because I was a bio degree and I was going to be a doctor too. I didn't even
Really?
apply though. Yeah.
I was taking an MCAT course as I was working for a media agency because my parents didn't know. And I had to tell them that I was like doing something to get into med school. And like, it's crazy. My degree, I literally don't even know where my degree is. It's somewhere. The diploma, no idea where it is. It says Bachelor of Medical Sciences on it, and I've never used it.
Yeah, I can totally relate. I don't know. It must be a way of thinking, maybe problem solving. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that happens to a lot of entrepreneurs, is that they just like find a problem, they see the next thing, just follow a bunch of dots. And when people look back on my life, they're kind of just like, oh, your dots are so random, but it was just me just following what I wanted to do. And I was like, it's not that random. It all makes sense. See, this is the story of how I got here and here and here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you look back, I think it all makes sense for sure. We do have a few people joining in, and we are at 6:58. For those of you who are just joining in, feel free to switch on your camera and say hello to Jackie, Michelle, and myself. Where are you guys joining us from? We are going to get started in 2 minutes, but before we get started, just wanted to check if everything is working okay. Yeah, audio is okay. Yeah, and if you guys have any questions. Cool. Yeah, Michelle, this time it's going to be super, super casual. We're just here to chat. There's no screen sharing. Everybody is welcome to drop your questions in the chat box. Yeah, and it's all going to be fun. Feel free to kind of jump in and ask any questions, Michelle, if you have any. But since we are close to time, I think I can go ahead and start an intro before we kind of jump into the Q&A. So I'll talk a little bit about me and Products by Women. For everybody who's joining in, hi, I'm Naimisha, founder of Products by Women. We are a diverse global community making skill-based jobs, training opportunities, and mentorship more accessible for women in tech all around the world. We've been around for a little over 1.5 years, and now are present in over 90 plus countries, have members in 90 plus countries. And since January, we've had over 2,500 learners just like you attend all our workshops, which is incredible. Also, our commitment, for 2021 is really to reduce gender inequalities that exist in tech and reduce pay gaps by making education, especially skill-based education in tech, more accessible for women. We also support women-led ventures and minorities by making resources available to them. And we're working very hard to make more resources available to women-led ventures. Also, we are really focused on re-engaging women back into the workforce, especially those who've been impacted by COVID, especially moms. As we know, there have been over 2 million mothers who've been really out of the workforce at this point of time. Outside of that, I also work in product and have spent close to a decade building products for good at a social enterprise. And I've recently made a switch to a leading agency. And really to give back, I occasionally invest in women-led ventures in a very small way, and also mentor and advise startups and serve as an advisory board member at Pace University, and I also sit on the Forbes Council. Most recently, I'm gearing up to launch a lifestyle and wellness brand called Full Ritual. So yeah, feel free to connect with me. Feel free to check out Products by Women at productsbywomen.com. But before we begin, just some quick housekeeping. So sorry, I'm just letting people in. Please do keep yourself on mute till the end. And if you do want to pose a question, drop it in the chat box or raise your hand. Do feel free to switch on your camera. And with that, I'd like to, actually, before we move to Jackie's introduction, I'd like to welcome Michelle, who's also partnered with us to present this incredible event. General Assembly is also partnering and putting this event together. So thank you to all our partners. Michelle, if you want to say a quick word about Flick and what you guys do, that'll be incredible.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Michelle. I'm the co-founder of Flick. We are a platform and community hub that connects female founders and leaders with students from across the world through meaningful apprenticeships. So female founders who are, super under-resourced are able to get helping hands on their businesses, and apprentices are able to gain career relevant experience, skills training, and mentorship under established female leaders. And we've grown our community to over 8,000 women from 55 countries around the world, and super excited to be partnering with mission-aligned organizations like Products by Women. So if you want to check us out at weareflick.com. I'm super excited to hear about what Jackie has to say, and I will have a lot of questions. So if you don't mind, I might jump in at some points. We were talking about this before with Jackie about her kind of unconventional journey into getting into tech and product management. So I'd also love to hear about that and kind of jive on that. But yeah, looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I want to kick off this conversation, Jackie, by really learning more about you. Where did you start? You are a product manager at Google, and you're also the founder of Quorum. Just give us a quick introduction. What inspired you to be where you are today? I know you gave us a rundown when Michelle asked you the same question, but I think it'll be really inspiring for you to share that piece again.
Sure. So I can, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I can give a quick rundown of kind of, how I got here, why I'm here, why am I doing what I'm doing, and then Naimesha, feel free to course correct me if I veer too far off topic with this question. So I'm currently a PM at Google. I've been here for about a year and a half. I specifically am a product manager in what's called the Geo organization. So if you think about Google really as a bunch of different businesses, you've got organizations like YouTube, ads, search, and then Geo is one of them. And there are others, of course, as well. And Geo is really most well known for Google Maps. So I work on the data side of the Geo org, which is all of the pipes and the processes and the flows to make sure that whatever data we have that represents the world gets there, right? And it gets there in a meaningful way to help our users. Additionally, I am, of course, the founder of Quorum, which I can, of course, get into in a little bit. But I started Quorum early into the pandemic last year for reasons I'll get into later. But really leading up to this, I've been a product manager for about 5 or 6 years. I graduated from school with a degree in biology and photography. Thought I was going to be a doctor. That didn't happen. Realized it just really wasn't the right path for me. And so when I graduated, I decided to just try my hands at launching my own photography business. I've always been a little bit of an entrepreneur. I think I get that from my mom, who also has her own engineering firm. And so it was just a natural thing for me to do. And through that, I gained a lot of exposure to startups in the Bay Area, which is where I was located at the time. And eventually kind of started working in-house at one of them and transitioned into a kind of generalist, wearing all hats, sort of PM kind of role. And it was only once I moved to New York City, where I was for 5 years, I'm now heading back west, that I officially, I would say, transitioned into a product management role, working for a series of startups, including a hardware startup, and also working in the enterprise space prior to Google.
That's awesome. And thank you for sharing that. Jackie, you spoke about Quorum. What is Quorum?
Yeah, so Quorum is a foundation, a platform really for amplifying women's stories. And so what that means is it's really twofold. Our mission is really to protect and preserve and uplift stories. And that's because from my personal experiences, from my community's experiences, I've seen too often women's voices get erased, dismissed, their stories get rewritten, right? And maybe kind of simplified over time. And as a result, we lose that history, right? We lose those learnings. And we ultimately don't really get to know one another, and we can kind of repeat ourselves. And so what I created, or what I'm in the process of launching, is this platform, which is kind of twofold, as I mentioned. One is that it's a series of stories which are bundled into different collections, different anthologies, if you will. And they're all paired with a candle, right? It's very, very, very simple in that sense. And so you have the opportunity to purchase a candle that represents a theme, like belonging. And when you purchase that candle, when you receive it, you'll be able to access that collection of stories that relates to that theme. And so the whole point of Quorum is to, of course, protect and preserve these stories, but also to potentially and hopefully provide everyone with an opportunity to read a new perspective, right? And connect with someone else, and to see into perhaps a different life that you may or may not have access to.
I love that. I know. Thank you for sharing that piece as well. You know, I do want to take a minute to kind of talk a little bit about, how are you going about really balancing your career at Google and really building this entire startup, and having a fluid career. I think we don't speak enough about having fluid careers and being able to do different things and having different passions. You're a photographer, you have a successful tech career. You aspire to really start the startup, and you're building and you're working on this. How do you do it all?
It's hard. I'll be the first to admit that. I'll keep this conversation really real, because I think that's the most important thing that I can offer. It's a matter of balance, and part of it is, and thank you for saying I have a successful tech career. Yet I think I always feel like there's still so much more to go here. But part of it is because Quorum is just me, right? Which is a challenge in and of itself, but it also affords me time. And I think when I first started out, I had this idea in my mind that I was like, oh, I have to ship something now. I have to make this product. I have to just get it out there. And that's true to some extent. Like, as a product manager, you learn, right, that it's important to get these ideas in front of people quickly so you can get feedback and iterate. But I was able to do that, and I can get into those details. I was able to do that without having a fully polished and shipped product, right? There are different ways in which you can iterate on your ideas. And so because of that, I've given myself time. I've given myself, I started this idea a year ago, and I've given myself time to polish the things that I think should be polished, whether that is like the packaging, that's the brand, things like that. And also acknowledge it when it's time to stop, when it's time to say, like, okay, this is good enough for launch. You can always continue iterating after that. And so that helps me navigate all of this, because I've certainly been very busy with work, and I've been working on the data side, getting vaccines on the map, or vaccine locations on the map. And so, there's a lot going on in that kind of professional sphere. And so I have to navigate that with myself, and acknowledge too, like, that sometimes I just need to stop and not do either of those things, right? Because I think it's very easy to fall into this trap as someone who's doing something on the side, that, okay, as soon as I finish work, and especially in this pandemic where I'm not seeing anyone, I don't have anything else like to do that's fun or scheduled, then I start working on Quorum. And while that's doable for a short period of time, after a while it can kind of start to run you down. And then I know that I'm not really producing the best product in either of my professional spheres. And so that's something I have to be very cognizant of.
Michelle,
do you mind if I jump in with a question?
Yeah.
I noticed that, so we talked about this prior, but you were a photographer at first, and then a startup just offered you a job. And then in that, I just looked at your LinkedIn. From director of photography, you became a product manager. Can you talk about how you were able to shift that mindset from director of photography into being able to manage a product? What does it look like to start kind of developing that product mind so that you can create those ideas into a product? What goes into that?
Sure. I think for me, as I briefly mentioned, I've always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial mindset. Like, I was always making stuff and selling it, whether I was screen printing T-shirts and selling them so that I could fund some travels that I had in high school, or I was making crafts, in middle school. Like it's literally just always been part of my DNA there. But when it comes to like product management itself and where I was at that startup, what I ultimately realized was like, one, like I'm a problem solver, always have been. And I think part of that is like, I'm an older sibling. So I also like really see when things are wrong and how they should be better. And I noticed this trend among some of my friends who are also PMs. And so when I was there at that startup, I was in my area trying to just focus on my lane, taking photos, building out our brand styling, making sure that the team of photographers was, being successful and they were being consistent. And I realized that, the internal process that we had our own content management system for the photographers to upload and organize their content. It was horrible. It was really, really bad. And the photographers were complaining, saying it would take them, hours to just upload a couple hundred photos and organize it. And they were just asking like, you have to pay us more. But we were a super, super small startup. There was no way we could pay them more. We were already kind of maxing out, and I had already negotiated like a pretty good rate for them to do this work. And so, for me, I was like, well, okay, we got to solve this problem. And it's not going to be to pay the photographers more just because we are super bootstrapped right now. And so the alternative was, okay, well, how do we make this content management system better? And so I just started drawing. It was just like, it just kind of was the first thing that came to my mind. Like, okay, how do I sketch this out? And like the way that I'm looking at it now and the way that I even had to use it at first was like, this is not logical. This doesn't make sense. It's too difficult. And it's not like, I didn't know the word, but it wasn't like the right UX, right? I didn't know that at the time. I had no idea what product management was. And so I just started doing that, working with our CTO. And it was really him, like after we built the thing, right? And it reduced our time, like not even by half, like even more than that. That, he was the one who's like, hey, have you ever thought about product management? And I was like, I don't know what that is. So, and, I was like, that's cool. Let me check it out. I'll think about it. And, I was in the Bay Area. And so I was pretty lucky to have access to a lot of meetups, being able to get some like casual coffees with people who were already PMs, reading a lot of books, a lot of blogs, that I started to learn really like what product management was. And, I say that I was a product manager there. I negotiated with our CEO, but at the same time, I was very early on. I didn't have a ton of familiarity with, what I was doing other than kind of like my own personal, creative and design experience and user experience. I've always been a bit of a storyteller. And so that's kind of what I bias towards. If you, think about like business, design, and tech as like three different related circles in product management, I'd say I definitely skew more towards the design side. But that was really how I entered into it. And, I can get into like my career path through New York. But that was the leg up that I got just to get in the door, part one, I'd say.
So with that product mindset shift, how did you start to learn, this is the way that UX should be, this is the way that UI should be, this is how we should be doing things? How do you manage a technical team? Because I'm assuming you didn't really have a technical background, right? And I personally am a non-technical founder as well. And so sometimes it's difficult to be able to understand how long things take to build, how much you should be paying. I think a lot of the founders that we work with are always like, so they are product managers themselves, right? They're like, this is the way that this is the way I want the product to be, but how do you know how much something should cost to build and all those little nitty gritty things?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I've always been curious, and I think that's what enables me to do the work that I do. I don't have a problem asking questions, even if they seem like really obvious questions. And so that enables me to learn pretty quickly, because I know I just start from ground zero. Like whenever I'm starting a new project, I'm starting a new company or whatever it is. I ask all the questions in the room. I ask the awkward questions too, maybe the questions that people think are like, too a little like we'll raise like red flags or whatever. I just ask it. I put it out there. I don't like having elephants in the room. And so that certainly, helps me understand both individuals and also their roles, and understanding the projects of like, and developing like a very strong and honest foundation, so that people hopefully like aren't, afraid to tell me like, oh, it's going to take like another week, or it's going to, this is actually how long it takes. Like, no, I don't want people to tell me like the thing that they think I want to hear. I want them to tell me like, actually, what's the honest answer? And so, I think that's part of it. And then the other thing is, as like the other part of the curiosity is like, I spend a ton of time online, whether it's, on these like the free courses online, understand like studying accounting, studying marketing analytics, doing a bunch of coding classes, learning Google's material design like way back when, so I could wireframe and make our own app according to their standards. I just was a bit of a sponge then, and I try to still be a sponge. And so that was those are all the different things that I just tried to pick up and absorb as quickly as possible to come off as someone who actually knew what they were talking about. But, you learn as you go. And a lot of it at that time was certainly like faking it until I made it to a certain extent. And sometimes I still feel that way, but I think that's life.
I think that's the life of all founders. This is my last question, I swear. But yeah, just the last question to kind of wrap that part up is, are there any resources that you think you could share with any of us that you use that helped you really understand how to manage product, understood the technical parts of everything, or anything you learned along the way that you thought was really, really key to your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, there's so many resources online, especially now, like that, and that the resources that I was kind of referring to were like a few 5-6 years ago at this point. And so I'm sure they've expanded. I took a lot of advantage of like Coursera classes, right? Because they're free. You don't have to pay for them if you don't want the certificate. And like, frankly, like I don't know how many people review the certificates anyhow. Like, but you can just do them at your own pace. That's how I learned more about kind of the fundamentals of business. That's how I learned more about kind of tech. And I think, when you think about like how do you be technical as a PM, as someone who doesn't come from like a computer science degree background, like if we label that as like very specific to what it is to be technical, there's so many documents out there, and to understand the fundamentals of like, how does the internet work? How do computers work? What are APIs? And ultimately like they all start to layer together. And as soon as you understand those fundamentals, then your knowledge will build on itself. And it's just about then understanding the specific context that you're sitting in as a PM for your project, right? Like what's the technology then? What's the tech stack that you're operating with? And again, like asking those questions of your engineers and taking the time to learn that. Not only will that help you just, understand what you're building, but it really goes a long way in building trust. I can't tell you like how many teams I've been on where the comments I get, the reactions from like the engineering managers, the team leads, the technical leads are like, like you really know this, or like you actually know what you're talking about. But the only reason I know what I'm talking about is because I asked those questions. I don't like I couldn't go out and say like, okay, I understand like how it applies here, and like say like, oh, I can go to a brand new product and just say like, okay, here's what their tech stack is. I couldn't predict it. No, like I know like the context I operate in, I know how it relates to everything else around me. And that's what matters the most, I think, from like being a technical PM. And the difference, of course, is if you're working on like a very, very technical product. But I think everyone can find their own roles within the PM ecosphere or ecosystem.
Awesome. I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. I mean, this really beautifully segues into my question, which is as per what you just mentioned, what do you think are some skills and traits that are necessary for product managers and founders? Because you're doing both.
Yeah, let's see. How would I distinguish between the two? Okay. I mean, these are heavily biased towards me. So, I'll say that. Something that I say quite often when it comes to being a PM, and I think this is true for a founder, like anyone who's trying to solve a problem, a skill that's really important, like I emphasize soft skills, is empathy, right? Like a product manager's fundamental role is to help users and solve their problems, address their issues. And so, and if you're not doing that, then, what are you building a product for? Hopefully it's not just for execs to make them happy, right? But you still have to empathize with them too and understand like why they want something. And so empathy is so important. And there are lots of ways to develop those skills. And, I think about now, like there's so many perspectives that are available, whether it's just through, books, movies, TV, just from like a broad level. But then of course, specific to your own products, it's going into the user research, it's making that time to really connect with who your users are. And then of course, who your stakeholders are as well. Curiosity, I mentioned that. I think that is something that falls equally on both sides, and staying hungry, and wanting to learn more, and being flexible as well, and understanding or knowing when, okay, maybe your idea, isn't that actual idea that we move forward with. And so being flexible and being supportive of your whole team, right? And seeing that success is not just about like your own ideas moving forward, but really the success of the team. And so, I mentioned these are all soft skills, but I personally believe that investing in like being a strong leader is what will make you successful, both in product management, because you have to lead by influence rather than by authority, because no one really reports to you unless you have other PMs reporting to you. And so that's why it's quite critical to focus on leadership there. And then also leadership, I think maybe for more obvious reasons, as an entrepreneur, where you are your own boss, you need to be able to direct kind of a whole ecosystem of whether it's contractors or employees, depending on the size of your business, and make sure that everyone is aligned and ultimately shipping the product that you expect.
Thank you. And what does your day really look like? You're doing, you are wearing so many different hats. So can you give us a rundown of your day so that everybody who's here and wants to do those two different things of like being able to successfully hold their full-time job, 9 to 5, and thinking about those side hustles? Like, what does your day really look like?
Sure. So, I start my day. The first thing that matters is like, where am I getting paid, right? I have a full-time job, and it's important that is always my priority. I need to be successful there. I can't drop the ball in that spot. So, for me, that's starting work 8:30-ish, whatever local time, and getting caught up at least on some emails. I do try and structure the end of my day, the previous day, so that I have some set of goals that I want to accomplish in the next day, because especially in the work streams that I'm involved in now, like it's deluge. The emails never stop. There's always a new siren that's going off. Someone needs something today, or they needed it 2 hours ago for an executive, and it's just a mess. And so I have to stay like really diligent there, because that's really the only way that I can make sure that my work doesn't like bleed into the late hours of the night. And so Quorum just continues to get pushed off. But that's hard, that's not always possible. And there's certainly days where I end up working, until 8, 9, 10 at night. Sometimes that's just the job. And so in those types of weeks, I really try to not be super hard on myself when I can't make progress on Quorum. And because that's just, the reality. And so I try to be, really intentional about dedicating time on the weekends, or figuring out how to structure the next week so that I am spending a couple hours here, a couple hours there. And, when it comes to Quorum, it is about finding time where I can. It's now we're in a pandemic, so the personal life, I think for the most part, is like kind of on hold. Like for the most part, I don't get to see that many people, or go outside and do a bunch of different things. And so, I think that has pros and cons with when you're doing two different things, or two different professional things about the job and a side hustle. But for me, it's then saying, okay, well, here, like, what is my burn down list in order to launch this product? And that has evolved over time. And then breaking that out into meaningful chunks so that I can say, okay, here's 2 hours. Maybe this is 2 hours where I am going through and cleaning up an interview, right? Because I interview all of the women whose stories are captured. And so I'll sit down for 2 hours, clean up that, and say that that's my round one. And then I'll go back maybe the next day when I have another 2 hours and say, okay, we're going to get this into like a ready state to actually be sent back to our storytellers for them to review, because that's also kind of the closed loop process. It's really important that as I curate this interview and just clean it up into a written format, that it still reflects their story and is accurate and is how they want to be represented. So, it's a lot. You're going to be staying up late. You're going to be working on weekends for sure. And things will take a lot longer than you expect them to when it comes to having your own business. Things won't go right. And I can certainly give examples of that where you'll have to redo things, or, it will take 10 times as long or whatever it is. And so part of it is, not just about blocking off the time, but also kind of preparing for the unexpected and being okay with that. Right. And that kind of goes back to the importance of being flexible.
So beautifully said, and I think I 100% agree with you. I mean, I'm also juggling a full-time job and some passion projects. But Jackie, how does one navigate their passion and their full-time job, right? Like, I mean, when does one start taking themselves seriously and be like, okay, this is the time I should quit my job and focus on my side hustle, and so that it becomes my main hustle. Not everyone is as has done a beautiful job like Michelle and successfully made it their full-time hustle, made their side hustle their full-time job, right? So how do you think about that? Because I'm still, as we're building products by women, I still have a 9 to 5 as well.
Yeah. Well, I know this is being recorded, and I don't want my employer to think that I'm certainly leaving the company, which I am not. For me, it's when I started this, and you don't have to get ahead of yourself, but I had to sit down and think about, what are the different pathways here? One, like, what if it fails? That happens. What if it, kind of goes a middle track? Or, what if it's actually succeeds? And what happens then? Like, what if I need to scale this? And who would do that? And so for me, like, the way that I'm at least approaching this is, Quorum is not something that I would do full time, at least not in the immediate term. Even if, let's say, it is wildly successful, in which case that's awesome. I love it. But I would hire someone else to do that, because I do love my full-time job, and I want to be able to do both, but also acknowledging, what do I have to let go of on the Quorum side in order to make sure that I can still do both successfully, and being able to, carefully hire someone who could do, maybe it is actual candle making because it's done by hand, or it's someone who can run, or do the accounting, right, and handle the books. And I can certainly talk about, what do you take on yourself as an entrepreneur versus what do you pay people to do or ask someone else to help you with. But that's at least how I've seen it. I think it's just an important thing for anyone to think about whenever they're starting a side hustle, is like, what's your long-term goal? What are you really trying to get to? Are you trying to make this your full-time job, or is this just like extra cash on the side? Is this a passion project? In order to find the right answer for themselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you touched upon a really important piece, which is not every side hustle or not every project that you take up is going to be a success, and not every startup is going to have a success story. And we don't talk about it often enough. And I think it's something that's really important to speak about, because it all sounds so glamorous, and I'm sure, Michelle, you can talk to it as well, that, the amount of countless hours that really go into building a startup. And Jackie, I'm sure you're working in the nights and to really build things out. But can you talk a little bit about, your mindset and how that relates to even burnout? Like, because you are trying really hard, right? And we don't talk about burnout enough. I know I've had times where I'm just like, I'm exhausted. I just need to pause. And I'm, I do have a bunch of emails which stack up, and I always go back and apologize a billion times, saying, I'm sorry, I didn't respond. But Talk to us about that, like about how do you preserve your energy? How do you make sure that you constantly tell yourself that it's okay for this not to be the next Facebook or the next, the most successful story out there?
Totally. So there's two parts of your question. Like one is like, yeah, how do I think about Quorum? And part of that is, like asking myself, like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm not, and I can I can speak to that now. Like, the reason why, like, I'm making Quorum is because I have seen, my family members, I've seen my friends, I've seen even people I don't know, like their stories get changed, right? We can make a ton of examples of that in news cycles, right? Of denying people their truth. Um, and that's messed up, right? Like that is just like something like that makes me personally like very, very angry. And so when I was sitting in Brooklyn in my old apartment last April, and we were in the middle of what was soon to be the beginning of the pandemic, and I was sitting there and thinking, how everything is going just exploding, right? People are losing their jobs and their livelihoods. Women are leaving the workforce. People, of course, are getting sick and dying. People are stuck at home with their abusers. All of these things, it just kept compounding. And I personally felt like a little helpless. I didn't really know what to do, right? You can donate, but money is one thing. And I really wanted to do something that would matter and that would make sure that those experiences are not forgotten. And so that's how kind of Quorum came to be. Right. And so when I think about like, launching and like, what's it going to be for me, like, it doesn't have to be a Facebook, right? It doesn't have to be all these things. The most important thing is that these stories get read, that these stories get heard. And that maybe like I can actually continue to do that, right? I can continue to interview more people and write those stories down, and they're there, right? They'll stay there and they'll stay protected, and no one can change that. No one can touch those things, and that's what really matters to me, right? And because I also have a full-time job, like I'm not in this to make millions of dollars, or like it's not for my own ego. I don't need those things. It really is a very, very personal passion project to a certain extent. Um, and to your second part of your question around burnout, burnout's real, and you can get burnout just from your regular job. And so, when you have two things going on, that's why I was saying it's really important to acknowledge that there are some days where you don't have to do both, right? You can finish your job at, maybe it's like you have an early day, which I hate to say, like you end at 5, or maybe you end at, at 6, like before dinner. And then it's just like, what? I really just want to watch TV today. That's just gonna be me. And there are days like that, and sometimes that's what you need, right? I'm a big fan of like self-care, hot baths, love them. So helpful just to like chill out. Getting outside. We got road bikes, during the pandemic, and so that's been really helpful just to physically distance myself from a computer screen, from all this stuff, and also just giving like the mind space to breathe and to iterate on ideas. I think I personally am a huge fan of breaks, right? And like stepping away. And I think this is kind of comes back to like just a creative approach to things. And if you're just sitting there like trying to force ideas down, like you're not going to solve your problem. You're not going to figure out, oh, like here's what the name of my product should be. Here's what this should be. Like, I thought of Quorum. I had so many ideas. Like, what's the name going to be? What's this going to be? And I was just writing all these ideas down, and I was getting so frustrated because none of them were clicking. And it wasn't until like I walked around a park that I was like, this is the name. This is what it's going to be, and that happens so many times. And so even though it can feel like, oh, I'm taking it easy, or I'm slacking off, like that's so false. It's such a false narrative. And it's more important to kind of diversify your day, make space for that, because you never know when those breaks might actually help you make significant progress.
So beautifully said. And I do want to take a moment to make sure that we are answering questions of everybody who's attending here. I know Tisa's raised her hand. So Tisa, feel free to kind of unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Jackie. It's Sujata. I actually am a research student in AI, and I'm looking for one thing to ask you. Like, as a product manager, are you Are you most interested to interact with engineers or product managers of other companies?
I'm going to ask you a question back just so I make sure that I fully understand your question. So, are you asking like from a networking perspective, or?
Yes.
Oh, I mean, I like to network with everyone. I don't have a bias or a preference. I think, I kind of skimmed over this in my New York career path, but what enabled me to get to where I am today is by meeting as many people as possible and always asking them, oh, who else do you think I should meet? And so those people some of them were in product, some of them were in marketing, some of them were probably engineers and designers at this point. Like, it was a while ago and had a lot of coffees. But for me, it's not about the title, because people's titles also can change. It's ultimately about building meaningful connections.
Thank you.
Sure.
And Jackie, I did want to ask you, before we ask some more questions from our audience, which part of building a product do you enjoy, and what's daunting to you? What do you enjoy about product management, and what do you dislike about product management? Since, we are talking about product as well.
Oof. Okay, I'll start with what I like about product management. I love stories. I was raised in a household of stories. Like my grandparents love stories, like family legend. And so for me, I really love getting deep into a problem and understanding, like, what's going on here? What are these people experiencing? What are they, what are their lives like? I think that is, that's certainly like part of why I got into product management. And so I still love that. And there's just, those stories never end. You always have an opportunity to switch products or switch companies and dive in pretty deep there. The things that I don't like about product management, there are times, frankly, like where product management can be a pretty thankless job. It is, you are expected to be a leader, you are expected to execute. But at the same time, you are not necessarily going to receive, the credit, and that's to be expected. I wouldn't. Again, it's not about ego, but you have a whole team of engineers, designer, maybe an analyst, maybe researcher. There's a lot of different roles that can contribute to a product success, and a lot of times, like, folks, like a lot of people need things from you, right? And so you're there's a lot of like giving, and you are the person who's expected to start that vision, to build out that strategy, to collect all that feedback, deal with some tough personalities and incorporate that in. And, I think you can kind of get like, I wouldn't say a full on mosh pit, but there's like a little bit of a tussle that can happen, and you have to be okay with that. And so I'm not saying like, oh, this is like a horrible thing about product management. It's just that it can be challenging. And I think you have to check your ego at the door and be okay with that, so that you can just be focused on the team's overall success, and not always, just focus on your own individual success.
Thank you. And Iris, I know you have a question as well. I do want to give you the opportunity to ask your question. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So hi, Jackie, and hi, everyone. Thank you so much for hosting this. And I'm currently working as a product manager at Google X, the Moonshot Factory.
Awesome.
So yeah, really great to meet another Googler here. I guess my question is kind of like in two part. So I'm just curious, like, first, how do you communicate your side project to your manager when it doesn't necessarily contribute to the success in your role? Because for me, I'm also running a side project well, like a social enterprise outside of work that's focused on climate change. And I'm always wondering, should I talk about that? Or because it doesn't really relate to what I do at work. And another question I have is, how do you juggle, how do you juggle between the two when you're working on side projects and your main role?
Sure. Yeah. How do I tell my manager that I I have a job affair?
This is a
for
good one.
me, I was pretty, let's see, when did I tell them? I think I was relatively upfront. Once I knew that I was actually getting kind of serious about this. I was starting to pay a designer to build the brand. I was investing good time, and I had kind of brought this idea to a bunch of people who I trusted, who were really like interested. They were like, yes, like keep going. And so I was getting a good like positive feedback loop going. And so it was probably like a month or two in where I think I just brought it up just like in a one-on-one where, my manager is like pretty great about asking like, how's it going? Especially then, right? It was early on in the pandemic. And I was like, oh, I'm starting a company on the side. And I made it very clear. I was like, and he was like, well, when do you work on it? And I was like, oh, weekends, clearly that's very true. Like, I don't do this during work hours. So like, the standard work hours, or if I have a higher priority at my full-time job that I need to get done. And so, I kind of had it like, really as a back burner item. It's not something that comes up that often in our conversations, but he's pretty supportive, and so I don't have to really worry about that. I think I'm lucky in that sense. Of course, not everyone's in that position. And then when it comes to juggling the two, it's being very intentional and as structured as possible with my time. And so this is something that is extra, and I have to treat it as that. Otherwise, I'm not being fair to my coworkers at my full-time job. And that's what I signed up to do first. That's what I'm getting paid to do. And so I have to invest myself there. And so sometimes that means like if work goes later than I wanted it to, quorum has to get shifted a little bit. And I have to be okay with that. Or it means like, hey, like I'm going to spend an extra hour on this like Saturday morning, or, maybe I'll spend all day Saturday working on this. And so it's just about that. And I mentioned this earlier, but, part of this is I'm not super strict on my deadline to launch. I initially thought I was going to launch in January of this year. And then in October, I was like, I have so much to do. This product needs so much in order to launch. That's impossible. Plus I'm moving across the country, and I have to plan my wedding. Like there's just so many things right in our lives beyond our work, of course, that we do. And so I gave myself that room to say, okay, let's just push it out, several months. And that's totally fine, so that I'm not a massive ball of stress, because for me, like these stories will stay relevant, right? It's not so urgent, so time sensitive that it has to get out the door tomorrow for it to matter. And hopefully it's the same for you. Clearly, climate change is a very critical problem that needs to be addressed now, but it is an ongoing challenge, unfortunately, that we'll continue to have to work on.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really great to hear. I guess a quick follow-up is related to Google, because I know that Google is very engineering-led organization, as we all know. So I wonder, how do you juggle between some of the power struggle between engineers and product managers? Because sometimes engineers would be, I mean, of course, we're working with them and then collaborating, but then I just feel like at Google specifically, because it's so engineering focused, like how do you deal with that?
Oh man. Yeah, it's, I work in the infrastructure org on Geo. And so it's very, very engineering focused, and there aren't as many PMs, or certainly not as many designers as you'd probably see on like other teams. And so the thing that I have to, that I focus on to ensure that I am, I saw that, what I have to focus on is in ensuring that Two things, I guess. Like one is like I have the right relationships and like and can connect with the key influencers on the engineering side, so that we are aligned, right? Because there's just so many more engineers than there are me, and so I can't just like schedule one-on-ones and like work hand in hand with every single engineer. It's just not possible. And then the second thing is like also making sure that I actually like stay true to myself as a PM. And I think, this is something that I struggled with initially, is, I joined and I came from actually like a very design oriented company. And so when I came here and I was like, cool, like these are how we like do workshops. This is how we solve problems. And like no one in my part of the org, like no one really like thought about it like that. No one really did that. I was like, okay, let me just, I was like, okay, just, blend in. Let's just think about it like however they do things. But it was, once I ramped up, I developed a little bit more confidence to say, okay, like, just because they do things that way, it doesn't mean that I can't do my things my way. Like, let me start introducing new concepts to the team, see if it gains traction, start bringing these ideas to leadership to push that change. Like I have no problem being an outspoken person in the room. And so that's part of it. And that's how I've at least been able to kind of push two ways to ensure that, and it isn't like engineering just pushes the PMs out and then that's, that's their word. But I also work with a great engineering team. So, I don't want to put them under the bus or anything.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Iris. I did want to call out, where's Tina? I love your little emoji thing on your face. That was cool. So do make a appearance back. That'll be awesome. I know you had a question as well. But Jackie, I wanted to ask you, where are you at currently with Quorum, and where do you see yourself in a year from now? I know you mentioned that you were gearing up to launch in April. You have your wedding coming up. Congratulations. So talk to us about when you're going to launch.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I'm traveling across the country. Just like one more thing to add to the list. So I spent the last 5 weeks, I have one more week, road tripping from New York to California, where I'm going to land, because now is the time to do that, right? And that's kind of part of like assessing priorities and big picture. And so I'm quite literally in New Mexico. When it comes to launch, I am planning to launch this summer, in hopefully June. I will say, it's tricky right now from just a pure like supply chain standpoint. So with the pandemic, of course, manufacturing is reduced, and also a lot of people are crafting. I mean, I added to that demand, and so candle supplies are actually like very, very limited. And so I'm like waiting right now for a bunch of supplies to get back in stock, which they're going to do in a couple of weeks. And so that also influences like when I can actually launch, or maybe I have to do a slightly smaller launch that's restricted in inventory before I can order more, just because of the other demand out there. So there's a little bit of competition in the market to get your hands on like wax and jars and fragrance oils and all this stuff. I mean, other than that, like the brand is ready to go. Our candle labels are ready to go. The packaging, like all these things, which took time, took a lot of investment in, and that's because that's what I chose to invest my time in, right? There's other things I was like, let's take a shortcut. Some of these things I care more about in design, and that presentation part was one of them. So I'd like to say we're almost there. We've got I have like 1 or 2 more interviews that I'm trying to lock down. If anyone here would like to share their story with me, sit down for a very, very casual chat, please let me know. We're always looking for more stories. I think you can either ping me on LinkedIn, or you can always email me at jackie@burnquorum.com, because your story deserves to be heard.
Yeah, I must say, Jackie and I did this, and she wrote my story in the most beautiful way possible, and I cannot wait for it to be released very soon. But Jackie, you must come back and do a launch with Products by Women, Flick, all of us, really to kind of celebrate your success. There is a question from Ramona. Ramona, feel free to kind of unmute yourself and, yeah, talk. Did she just leave?
Oh, sorry. I just didn't realize I lowered my hand, and I thought I was unmuted. Obviously, that's not how it works. But Jackie, first of all, congratulations on your wedding. I actually had a question about the user research process. So, like, when you were initially, trying to understand, like, okay, what will Quorum be like? Like, what was that process of customer research? And do you like go back and conduct it with those users often, or was that like a one-time process? How did that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So, there are a couple different things that I did. First was just starting out super informally by like talking to my family, my friends, and also like, this product isn't just for women. It's really for anyone. And so talking to like my husband's like dude friends and be like, hey guys, this is what I'm doing, and seeing like how did it resonate with them, right? And what was the right messaging too, so that this was something that it's not supposed to be abrasive. It's supposed to be, something that is just speaking light to, the experiences that people have had. And so there was that kind of like vetting, very, very informal vetting. There was then, I would reach out to my people in my professional network to also kind of validate from a business perspective. I just asked them for a favor and be like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Or like, here's my website. What do you think about it? Or like, how does this come across to you? And so I had some like pretty like senior people take a look at it, give me feedback, which is like, thank you to them for lending their eyes and ears on that. And then I started sending out like surveys because I knew that I was going to make candles, but I'd never made a candle before. I bought candles. I have my own opinions about them. But I started sending out surveys to people, asking them, how much would you pay for a candle? What is it that you like about candles? What don't you like in one? Is there stuff like, are there certain waxes you wouldn't buy for like ethical reasons, things like that? And then at a certain point, I had kind of the actual like a prototype basically of these candles, of these different scents. And I sent them out to folks and had them test it, test how it burned, test how, like, what did it smell like? Did they like it? Did they like what's called like the cold throw, which is before you light a candle. So there's a cold throw and a hot throw, which can be different, or most likely are different, and getting that feedback. And then, iterating a little bit more there and making the sense a little bit more complex, or, veering off in a slightly different direction. So those are kind of like the different types of user research that I did. Right now, I've been focused more on delivering a product than user research, but I'm sure like, after I launch, I will certainly, hopefully be collecting user feedback. What do people like about these candles? What don't they like? What other kinds of stories do they want to see, etc.
Thank you so much for answering that. And I love the website. So that's,
thank you.
yeah. I guess I had like one follow-up question, which is, I know you said you think a lot in the problem space before jumping to a solution. What would be your advice for like other people on that ground? I feel like, I'm trying to work on something which is my own initiative, and I feel like I keep jumping in the solution space as soon as I talk to someone, and then I realize that this is probably only one user's thought, and I'm trying to connect more users to like similar groups because I obviously want that solution to work. And that's when I'm realizing that, every person wants different things, and like I need to figure out what's the best approach. But like, what would be your advice around that, especially because you focus so much even around the people, like on people that were around you. So I feel like that also results in more feedback that can come at any point. So how do you think through that? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard not to jump to solutions. I think that's a very like human tendency to do. When you're doing this user research, I think it's really important to think about like, what are your questions, right? And it's really important not to delete that user. And when you're trying to get a sense of like, well, what's the problem space? Understand like, what are these people's like motivations? Like, what are they actually trying to accomplish? But maybe for some reason they're not able to. Why aren't they able to accomplish that? And so rather than getting a kind of a feedback that says like, oh, I want this, right? Like I want that product. Instead, you'll get a sense of, the different patterns that you start to see across all of your users. And they may not, all be the same pattern. That's fine. But you can see where like the majority or the primary need is, and think about how to solve for that. And that will hopefully kind of pull you away from that solution mindset and instead be a bit more problem oriented.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ramona. I do want to be mindful of time. We are at 7:56 p.m. Does anybody have any other question? And while we are wrapping up, I do want to take a minute to ask Jackie. Jackie, what's your advice to aspiring entrepreneurs, who are really thinking about launching their ventures? Any tips, any wisdom you want to leave us with before I ask other people to kind of jump in here as well?
Absolutely. One, just do it, right? Like there's no better time than the present to try something. And two is get that feedback, put it out there early, put that concept out there and see how that resonates with people. It's hard to put something that, you made your product baby out in front of people because it's very personal and it's very vulnerable to do that. But that's the only way that like if you're actually on the right track. And it's much better to do that sooner versus after you've invested so much time and blood, sweat, and tears into it. And then the last thing is like delegate, pay, ask for help. You can't do all of this on your own. And nor should you. Like no one's done that, right? No one's built a successful company by themselves. And for me, that's, hey, I've asked friends to like help me with one part of the website. It's, and they did that out of the kindness of their heart. I paid a designer, I paid a lawyer to structure our contracts, to structure our privacy policy, because that's not something I'm qualified to do, nor something that I wanted to get, sued for at any point in time. And so understanding like where you can multiply your efforts by getting help elsewhere and versus the stuff that you should personally invest in, because that's, the core of the company. That's really important before you get started or, along the way, so that you can continuously make progress and not get stuck somewhere.
Thank you so much. And before we do close out, how can anyone reach out to you? I know you mentioned and you gave out your email address and information, but any other way like Instagram, LinkedIn, where can people reach out to you?
Yeah, LinkedIn, it's just Jackie DeJesse. I think there's only one of me on there. And then, my email for Quorum is jackie@burnquorum.com. Our website is burnquorum.com as well. And then on Instagram, you can follow us at burnquorum. Feel free to DM me there. Again, it's a one-woman show here, so I'll certainly respond to your messages. So thank you so much.
Awesome. And Michelle, before we do close out, do you have any questions at all, or do you want to say something before,
No, that a lot of people asked the questions that I wanted to ask as well, and it was really great to hear about your story. And I also checked out your website, and it's super mission aligned with everything that we're doing. So I'll definitely add you on LinkedIn. My one question though is when I tried to add you on LinkedIn, it asked for an email. So which email should I put in to add you on LinkedIn?
I actually need to make that update. So why don't I will. Like BRB, in a few minutes after this call ends, I need to just update my privacy settings. It's just trying to avoid some creeper requests for a while. Thankfully that's gone. So I'll make that update on my LinkedIn so anyone can connect with me.
That's incredible.
Cool, because we definitely have a lot of women in our network who would be happy to share their stories. So happy to showcase the work that you're doing with our community as well.
Great. Thank you, Michelle.
Cool. Thank you everyone for coming. And if you want to add me on LinkedIn, you can add me.
Yes. How about we have everyone drop their LinkedIn in the chat box, and that'll be a great way for people to kind of, I'm going to leave this open for some time, and you can do that, and or also kind of join our Slack channel. I'm just going to drop a bunch of resources, but yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a nice night.